The moonlight cast long shadows across the Montana farmland as 12 heavily armed men moved silently through the tall grass. Their night vision goggles revealed the modest two-story farmhouse ahead, seemingly peaceful in the darkness. Felix El Fantasma Reyes adjusted his tactical vest and smiled coldly. "Remember, we want the land intact. The old man and the kid are expendable. Should be the easiest acquisition yet," he whispered into his radio. His men spread out with military precision, covering all escape routes. They'd done this a dozen times before in the valley. These simple farmers never stood a chance. Then it happened. The point man dropped silently without even a cry of alarm. Then another. No gunshots, no noise, just bodies falling. "Position 4, report," Felix hissed into his radio. Static answered him. A low, menacing growl cut through the night. Felix swung his weapon toward the sound, but saw nothing. Then he caught it a silhouette against the moonlight. Not a man, but a massive German shepherd, eyes gleaming like amber fire, hackles raised. Behind the dog stood a small figure, barely visible in the darkness. "Atlas," came a child's whisper, soft yet somehow carrying across the field. "Her hunt." The night erupted into chaos. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Ironwood Valley had always been known for its breathtaking beauty. Nestled between the rugged Montana mountains, the fertile farmland had sustained generations of hard-working families. The Thorn Farm sat at the valley's heart, its 100 acres of wheat fields and apple orchards glowing golden and crimson in the autumn light. But the valley had changed these past few years. Economic hardship had forced many farmers to sell, and strangers with money and dark intentions had moved in, bringing shadows to this once peaceful place. For 12-year-old Emma Thorne, the farm was more than land, it was memory made tangible. Every corner held echoes of her mother, Catherine, who had died 3 years ago in the terrible storm that had ravaged the valley. It was the same storm that had brought Atlas into her life. Emma had found the German shepherd puppy half drowned in a drainage ditch, his leg broken, whimpering in the driving rain. She'd carried him home, nursed him through the night while her father attended to neighbors. By morning, a bond had formed that went beyond simple friendship. Jack Thorne watched his daughter with equal measures of pride and worry. At 45, his weathered face carried deeper lines than his years warranted. After Catherine's death, he'd thrown himself into raising Emma and maintaining the farm, despite mounting debts. Few in the valley knew of his past as a military K-9 handler with the Army Rangers, where he'd trained dogs for combat and search operations. He'd passed these skills to Emma, amazed at her natural ability with Atlas. Their neighbors and friends had become a makeshift family. Sarah Bennett, whose farm adjoined theirs, had stepped in as a surrogate mother figure for Emma after Catherine's passing. Sheriff Cooper, a good man overwhelmed by the valley's changing dynamics, did what he could with limited resources. Katie Reynolds at the library kept Emma supplied with books on dog training. Marcus Wilson could fix any farm equipment and had a knack for improvised electronics. Zoe Parker, the school computer teacher, and Noah Collins, whose father was the local doctor, rounded out Emma's small circle of allies. None of them knew they would soon face Felix El Fantasma Reyes, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency had earned him control of the cartel's northern expansion. Few who saw his carefully tailored suits and polite smile recognized the predator beneath, except perhaps for Atlas, who seemed to sense darkness in men's hearts before they even spoke. Emma noticed the changes in Ironwood Valley gradually, like watching storm clouds build on the horizon. First, the Henderson place sold after being on the market barely a week, unusual for a property that size with outdated equipment. Then the Miller farm went next, followed by 3 more sales in rapid succession. What troubled Emma most wasn't just the sales, but how the families disappeared afterward. No goodbyes, no forwarding addresses, just empty houses quickly filled with men who didn't farm the land. One crisp September morning, as Emma trained Atlas at the edge of their property, she spotted Sarah Bennett's pickup truck racing down the dirt road, dust billowing behind it. Atlas perked up his ears before Emma heard the engine, his senses far keener than her own. "Easy, boy," she said, placing a reassuring hand on his muscular shoulder. Sarah's face was pale as she climbed out, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed graying hair from her forehead. "Emma, honey, is your daddy home? I need to talk to him right away." Jack was in the barn repairing the ancient tractor that seemed to break down weakly. He wiped his hands on a rag as Sarah approached, his expression shifting from welcome to concern as he registered her distress. "The Hendersons didn't leave by choice, Jack," Sarah said, her voice low as though afraid of being overheard despite the isolated location. "Tommy Henderson called me last night from his cousin's place in Idaho. Said men came to their house, said there'd been complaints about water contamination from their property affecting the watershed. When Bill demanded to see documentation, they showed him photos of Tommy walking home from school. It said it would be a shame if something happened to him." Emma watched her father's face harden, a look she'd seen only a few times, like when the bank threatened foreclosure last year. "They're moving through the valley systematically," Sarah continued. "Anyone who doesn't sell gets pressured. The Miller's barn fire wasn't an accident. Neither was the brake failure on the Carson's truck." "Have you talked to Sheriff Cooper?" Jack asked. Sarah laughed bitterly. "He says without evidence there's nothing he can do. But he did warn me, and now I'm warning you. They'll be coming for your place soon. It's too valuable, controls too much of the valley's water access." Emma felt Atlas press against her leg, sensing her unease. She scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. 3 black Zephyrs with tinted windows proved Sarah right just 2 days later. They arrived during breakfast, the gravel in the driveway announcing their arrival seconds before Atlas began a low, continuous growl, a sound Emma had never heard from him before. "Emma," her father said quietly, "take Atlas to the back porch and stay there until I call for you." But Emma positioned herself by the window instead, Atlas at attention beside her, watching as 5 men in expensive suits approached the house. Their leader walked with the confidence of someone unaccustomed to hearing no. Despite the warm smile he offered her father on the porch, Emma noticed his eyes remained cold. "Mr. Thorne," the man extended his hand. "Felix Reyes, representing Sunbelt Agricultural Investments. You have a beautiful property here." "Thank you," Jack replied, deliberately not taking the offered hand. "It's not for sale." Felix's smile didn't falter. "I understand your attachment, but I think you'll find our offer quite generous. $3 million, significantly above market value, especially considering current mortgage rates and the difficulties many farmers are experiencing." Emma watched her father stiffen almost imperceptibly. No one should have known about their financial struggles. "As I said, we're not interested in selling. This land has been in my family for generations." "Perhaps I wasn't clear." Felix's voice hardened slightly. "The valley is changing, Mr. Thorne. Progress, you might say. You can be part of that change and benefit from it. Or," he gestured vaguely at the farm, "accidents happen, especially to struggling operations like yours. Barn fires, equipment failures. Farming is such dangerous work." Atlas's growl deepened, and Emma placed a steadying hand on his neck. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Reyes?" Jack's voice remained calm, but Emma recognized the dangerous edge to it. "Simply stating facts," Felix replied, producing a business card. "We'll give you 48 hours to reconsider. My employer is very interested in this particular property." As the men returned to their vehicles, one of them gestured toward Atlas in the window. "Beautiful dog. German Shepherd, yes? Would be a shame if something happened to him." After they left, Emma found her father in the kitchen, staring at the business card. "They're not really agricultural investors, are they?" she asked. Jack looked up, seeming to debate how much to tell her before sighing heavily. "No, Emma Bear, they're not." He sat at the table, motioning for her to join him. "There are things I haven't told you about my life before I met your mother, about what I used to do in the military." That night, after learning truths that shifted her understanding of her quiet father, Emma lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Jack moving through the house, checking windows and doors. Atlas lay at the foot of her bed, his head raised, ears constantly adjusting to track sounds outside. "We're not leaving, are we?" Emma whispered to her father when he came to check on her. Jack knelt beside her bed. "No, sweetheart. This is our home. Your mother is here." He touched her cheek gently. "But things might get difficult. I need you to be brave and do exactly as I say." Emma nodded, one hand resting on Atlas's head. "We can protect our home. Atlas and I both." Her father smiled sadly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." But as Emma drifted to sleep, she knew it already had. The warnings became reality faster than anyone expected. 3 days after Felix Reyes's visit, Sarah Bennett's irrigation system was found sabotaged, flooding half her alfalfa field and ruining the crop. The sheriff called it vandalism, but everyone knew better. Emma overheard her father on the phone with Sarah, his voice tight with controlled anger as he promised to help with repairs. That afternoon, Sheriff Cooper's patrol car pulled up to the Thorne farmhouse. He removed his hat as Jack met him on the porch, his weathered face grave beneath the brim of his Stetson. "Thought you should know, Jack. The Bennett's place wasn't the only incident. Thompson's tractor was tampered with, brake lines cut. He's lucky he noticed before taking it down the hill pasture." The sheriff lowered his voice, though Emma could still hear from her position by the screen door. "These folks aren't playing games. They've been moving north from Arizona valley by valley. Local authorities can't touch them. Too many payoffs, too little evidence." "What about federal help?" Jack asked. Sheriff Cooper shook his head. "Too slow, and we're low priority." "Just be careful, Jack. They're sending a message. Anyone who doesn't sell gets squeezed." The next morning, Emma felt the change in the atmosphere at Ironwood Valley Elementary School. Several classmates avoided her, including Miguel Sanchez, who normally sat with her at lunch. During recess, she found him behind the equipment shed, looking miserable. "My uncle works for them," he whispered, not meeting her eyes. "He said I shouldn't talk to you anymore. Said your family is going to have troubles if your dad doesn't wise up." Emma's hands clenched into fists. "They're threatening children now." Miguel shrugged. "They don't see it as threatening. They call it creating incentives." That afternoon, Emma witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see. Taking a shortcut home through the woods that bordered the old Henderson property, she and Atlas froze at the sound of engines. Through the trees, Emma watched large trucks unloading crates into the barn crates that were quickly transferred to unmarked vans without estate plates. Men with rifles patrolled the perimeter. Atlas growled softly, and Emma quickly covered his muzzle with her hand. "Quiet, boy," she whispered. "We need to tell Dad." They made it home safely, but Emma's report visibly shook her father. That night, he sat her down at the kitchen table, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen. "Emma, there are things I need to teach you, things I hoped you'd never need to know." He placed a hand on Atlas's head. "Your training with Atlas has been good, but now we need to take it to another level." The next morning began with Jack showing Emma how to create surveillance points around the property using Atlas as a mobile sentry. He taught her a series of whistle commands that would direct Atlas to different locations, to alert silently instead of barking, to return immediately regardless of other commands. "Why didn't you teach me these before?" Emma asked as Atlas performed flawlessly. "Because these aren't pet tricks, Emma. These are military working dog protocols." Jack knelt to her level. "I was a K-9 handler in the Army Rangers. Atlas has the same instincts as the best dogs I trained. But I never wanted this life for you." Emma absorbed this revelation about her quiet father. "Is that how you met Mom?" A shadow crossed Jack's face. "In a way." He stood abruptly. "Let's continue." By week's end, they'd established a security system centered on Atlas's abilities. The dog learned to distinguish between normal visitors and potential threats, to check the property perimeter, to alert to unusual sounds or smells. Emma practiced emergency protocols: where to hide, how to communicate, when to run. But the most unsettling development came when Jack returned from town with a bruised face and cut lip. He'd been confronted outside the feed store by two men who made it clear that the accidents would escalate if he continued to resist selling. At night, unable to sleep, Emma found a box in her father's closet containing newspaper clippings. Most concerned military operations overseas, but one yellowed article caught her eye, a small piece about a storm fatality 3 years ago, her mother's death. But what struck Emma was the line, "Police are investigating inconsistencies in the scene." She'd always been told her mother's death was a tragic accident, caught in flash flooding during the sudden storm. When she confronted her father the next morning, his face went ashen. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said quietly. "Was Mom's death really an accident?" Emma demanded. Jack closed his eyes briefly. "I don't know for certain." There were questions. The storm was convenient timing. He looked at her directly. "Your mother was more than a science teacher, Emma. She consulted with federal authorities on certain environmental investigations. Before we moved here, she was tracking chemical signatures from illegal processing labs." "Like drug labs?" Emma whispered. Jack nodded slowly. "The timing of Felix showing up here, it can't be coincidence. I think he knew your mother." Atlas pressed against Emma's side as the weight of this revelation settled over her. The nightmares that had plagued her since her mother's death suddenly took on new meaning, not just grief, but her subconscious processing things she'd overheard, the clues she hadn't understood. "They're not just after our land, are they?" Emma asked. "No," Jack confirmed. "I think they're eliminating loose ends. And we're the loosest end of all." The transformation of the Thorn Farm began at dawn the next day. Jack moved with purpose, a man who had rediscovered old skills long set aside. He retrieved a weathered footlocker from the cellar, its military stenciling faded but still visible. Inside were items that made Emma realize how little she had known of her father's past: tactical gear, specialized equipment, and a leather-bound manual on canine handling marked with official Army insignia. "First rule of defense," Jack explained as they walked the property line at sunrise: "know your terrain better than your opponent." He pointed out natural features Emma had seen her entire life, but never truly observed: the slight depression that could conceal movement, the ridge that provided a vantage point over the main road, the dense copse of trees that could serve as a blind spot if not properly monitored. Atlas trotted beside them, alert and focused in a way that suggested he sensed the gravity of these lessons. Emma realized that much of her casual training with Atlas had built a foundation stronger than she knew. His ability to follow hand signals, to hold position until called, to distinguish between welcome guests and strangers, all translated perfectly to their new reality. "We need eyes and ears beyond our property," Jack said. "That means trusted allies." Their first recruit was Sarah Bennett, who arrived that afternoon with grim determination etched on her face. "They cut my fence line last night," she reported. "Cattle got into Watson's corn. He's blaming me, not them." "Division is their strategy," Jack responded. "We counter with unity." Marcus Wilson joined next, bringing his technical expertise and a network of contacts among the farming community. Zoe Parker offered her computer skills, creating a secure communication system using outdated flip phones that were less traceable than smartphones. Noah Collins, whose father remained unaware of his involvement, provided medical supplies borrowed from his father's clinic. Katie Reynolds from the library became their information hub, as her position gave her access to property records and local history that proved invaluable. Each night they gathered in the Thorn Barn, converted now into a command center disguised as a simple workshop. Jack drew on his military experience, teaching them counter-surveillance techniques, recognition patterns for identifying cartel members, and emergency response protocols. Atlas became central to their security system, with Emma developing a series of training exercises that enhanced his already remarkable abilities. He can distinguish between 15 different scents now, Emma reported proudly after a week of intensive training. She had discovered her mother's old research journals, which contained surprisingly detailed notes on scent detection and animal behavior. And he alerts differently for each one. Jack watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. She was thriving under pressure, her natural affinity with Atlas blossoming into something extraordinary. But she was still a child, his child, and the shadows under her eyes spoke of nightmares and burdens no 12-year-old should bear. The first test of their preparations came on a moonless night, when Atlas alerted to movement along the eastern property line. Emma, who had been sleeping with the dog at the foot of her bed, recognized his specific signal for human intruders, a stiff posture and 3 soft taps of his paw against the floor. "Dad," she whispered, slipping into his room, "we have visitors." The network activated seamlessly. Jack moved to the designated observation point while Emma commanded Atlas to track but not engage. Sarah, who had been staying in their guest room since her encounter with the fence cutters, manned the communications hub. Through night vision binoculars, they observed 3 men placing what appeared to be surveillance equipment in the trees bordering their property. "Not tonight," Jack murmured, documenting their positions with a digital camera. "We let them think they're undetected. Knowledge is advantage." For 3 days, they allowed the surveillance to continue, feeding it carefully curated scenes of normal farm life while conducting their real preparations out of view. Emma discovered she had a talent for tactical thinking that surprised even her father. "If they're watching the house and barn," she reasoned during a strategy session, "then we use the root cellar access through the apple orchard. Atlas can run interference if we need to move unseen." The cartel's frustration became evident as their escalation tactics failed to produce results. Unlike other farmers, the Thorns didn't panic when fuel lines were damaged or threatening notes appeared. The community network provided immediate support, Marcus repairing equipment, neighbors assisting with chores when Jack needed to focus on security, the rotating watches that ensured the farm was never unwatched. Sheriff Cooper, initially skeptical of their organized resistance, became a cautious ally after finding his own office bugged and a deputy's family threatened. "Can't help officially," he told Jack during a seemingly casual visit that was actually a secure meeting. "Too many eyes watching. But I can make sure certain calls get delayed responses, give you breathing room if needed." Emma's school life became increasingly complicated. Some classmates avoided her entirely, while others, those whose families had already lost farms to the cartel, watched her with desperate hope. Miguel Sanchez, despite his uncle's warnings, passed her valuable information in folded paper airplanes that appeared to be childish pranks but contained observations about cartel movements. "They're getting angry," he whispered during a rare moment alone. "My uncle said El Fantasma doesn't like being disrespected. He always makes examples." The warning proved prescient. That weekend, the Thompson dairy farm erupted in flames, a clear escalation from previous accidents. But as the community rallied to fight the fire and save the livestock, Emma noticed unfamiliar men watching from vehicles parked along the road, and their satisfaction evident even at a distance. "They're sending a message," Jack said as they watched the firefighting efforts. "We're in measuring our response." What the cartel observers saw was a community coming together, farmers operating fire equipment with practiced efficiency, women organizing supply chains, even children helping lead animals to safety. What they couldn't see was the strategic assessment happening beneath this humanitarian effort, every member of Emma's network noting cartel positions, identifying new faces, and communicating through seemingly casual interactions. Atlas proved his worth repeatedly during this period. His ability to detect the distinctive chemical smells associated with cartel operation-specific fuel mixtures, gun oil, as even the particular cigarette brand favored by Felix's men gave them crucial early warnings of surveillance or incursions. Emma refined his training daily, using techniques from her mother's journals that focused on scent discrimination and stealth alerts. "Your mother would be so proud," Sarah told Emma one evening watching her work with Atlas in the fading light. "She always said you had a gift for understanding animals in a way most humans can't." The mention of her mother triggered Emma's growing suspicion that there was more to Catherine Thorne's death than she'd been told. Late that night, Emma slipped into her father's office and found a locked drawer in his desk. Using skills Marcus had taught her, she opened it to discover a file labeled simply Catherine Evidence. Inside were photos of the storm scene where her mother had died, official reports, and a handwritten note in her mother's writing. "F knows about the samples. Moving them to secure location. We'll explain when safe." The revelation struck Emma like physical pain. Her mother's death had been deliberate, not accidental. And F could only be Felix Reyes. But what samples? What had her mother discovered that was worth killing for? When confronted with this discovery, Jack finally revealed the complete truth. Catherine Thorne had been collaborating with federal authorities, using her background in environmental science to analyze soil and water samples from properties along the Cartels' distribution route. She had discovered chemical markers proving that certain farms were being used for drug processing, evidence that could have dismantled the Cartel's entire northern operation. "The storm provided convenient cover," Jack explained, his voice hollow with old grief. "The flash flood that took her wasn't entirely natural. They breached the irrigation reservoir upstream." For Emma, this confirmation transformed her mourning into something sharper, more focused. The nightmares that had plagued her since her mother's death, vague terrors of rushing water and shadowy figures, crystallized into clear motivation. "They're not just trying to take our farm," she said. Atlas pressed reassuringly against her side. "They're covering up murder." The network's first major test came 2 weeks after the Thompson fire. Atlas alerted to multiple vehicles approaching under cover of darkness, the first direct assault on the Thorne farm. Thanks to their preparations, everyone moved to predetermined positions. Sarah manned the communications hub, Zoe monitored their rudimentary but effective surveillance system, Marcus and Noah took up defensive positions, and Katie coordinated with sympathetic neighbors who formed an outer perimeter of watchers. Emma and Atlas took their position in the converted hayloft, which provided both concealment and a clear view of the approaches. Jack had initially wanted Emma in the secure root cellar, but had reluctantly acknowledged that her connection with Atlas made them most effective together. "Remember," he told her before taking his own position, "our goal is deterrence, not confrontation. We show them we're not easy targets, but we don't engage directly unless absolutely necessary." The cartel force was larger than expected, 15 men in 4 vehicles, armed and moving with tactical precision that suggested military background. They disabled the main power line to the farm, expecting to plunge the property into darkness and confusion. Instead, they were met with backup systems Marcus had installed, motion-activated lights that strategically illuminated their positions while leaving defensive positions in shadow. Emma directed Atlas using silent hand signals, the dog moving like a ghost to specific listening posts and returning with behavioral signals that told her exactly where intruders were positioned. This intelligence was relayed through their communication network, allowing Jack and the others to maintain defensive advantage. When the cartel forces attempted to approach the house from 3 directions simultaneously, they found their paths undermined by carefully concealed obstacles, irrigation ditches suddenly flooded, equipment positioned to block direct routes, noise traps that revealed their positions. From their perspective, they faced not a hastily organized resistance, but a carefully coordinated defense system that anticipated their every move. "They're pulling back," Sarah's voice came through the handheld radio. "Regrouping at the main road." "Stay alert," Jack responded. "This might be a feint." Indeed, after a brief consultation, the cartel forces adopted a new approach, a direct frontal assault on the barn, apparently believing it contained whatever they sought. As they advanced, Emma made a split-second decision that would alter the course of the confrontation. "Atlas, distract," she commanded, using a signal they had practiced but never deployed in a real situation. The German Shepherd darted from shadow to shadow, creating a series of movements that drew the attackers' attention in multiple directions. In their confusion and attempts to target the dog dead, they failed to notice they were being channeled into a predetermined zone where Marcus had prepared a surprise farm machinery activated by remote control, then creating a wall of moving metal that forced them back. The combination of Atlas's psychological warfare and the unexpected mechanical response broke the attackers' coordination. After a tense standoff, they retreated completely, leaving behind equipment and even a wounded man who'd been injured trying to scale a suddenly electrified fence. "This isn't over," the abandoned man warned as Noah provided basic medical treatment before the sheriff arrived. El Fantasma doesn't forgive resistance. The aftermath brought both victory and concern. Their successful defense proved their preparations effective, but the scale of the attack confirmed the cartel's determination. Sheriff Cooper, arriving after the confrontation ended, took official statements that carefully omitted certain aspects of their defense system. "I don't know how you held them off," he said privately to Jack, "and officially I don't want to know. But they'll be back with more men and fewer restraints." The local newspaper reported the incident as an attempted robbery thwarted by vigilant neighbors, but the community understood the reality. The Thorns had stood against the cartel and survived the first round. In the days that followed, Emma noticed subtle changes: farmers nodding respectfully to her father in town, mothers drawing their children closer when she passed them, a mixture of fear and hope in their eyes. Atlas became something of a local legend, his reputation growing with each retelling of the night's events. Children whispered that he could see in absolute darkness, that he moved faster than human eyes could track. Emma knew the truth was more mundane but no less impressive: years of training and an unbreakable bond that allowed them to work as a single unit. The cartel's response was not the immediate escalation they expected, but a disturbing change in tactics. Felix Reyes himself appeared at Emma's school for a parent information session about community development opportunities. His manner charming and his promises of economic revitalization compelling to many struggling families. "Progress requires change," he told the assembled parents, his gaze occasionally finding Emma where she sat beside her father. "Those who resist progress often find themselves left behind, or worse." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as he outlined plans for agricultural modernization that would bring jobs and stability to the valley. What went unspoken but clearly understood was the consequence of standing in the way of these plans. As they left the meeting, Jack placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "He's trying a different approach, turning the community against us." "It won't work," Emma said with a confidence that surprised even her. "Not everyone believes his lies." She was right. That night, their farmhouse kitchen filled with neighbors, some they'd known as allies, others who had previously kept their distance. They brought food, offers of help, and intelligence about cartel movements in the valley. "My cousin works at the county records office," said a woman Emma recognized from church. "They've been researching mineral rights underneath the valley floor. This isn't just about drug routes, there's something else they want." This new information shifted their understanding of the conflict. If the cartel sought something specific beneath their land, the threat wouldn't end with defensive victories. They needed to discover what made their property so valuable. As the meeting concluded and their neighbors departed, Emma found her father studying old survey maps of the property with renewed intensity. "What are we looking for?" she asked. "I don't know exactly," Jack admitted. "But your mother was an environmental scientist. If she found something, chemical evidence, contamination patterns, resource deposits, it might be in her research notes." That night, Emma dreamed of her mother standing in the apple orchard, pointing urgently toward the old well that had been capped years before Emma was born. She woke with Atlas alert beside her, as though he had shared the dream. "Dad," she said over breakfast, "I think I know where Mom hid the samples." The discovery spread through the cartel's network like wildfire. Within days of Emma's realization about the well, unfamiliar vehicles began appearing along distant ridgelines, watching the Thorn farm through high-powered optics. Felix Reyes convened a meeting in the former Henderson property that drew representatives from cartel operations across 3 states. The scale of this gathering, reported by Sheriff Cooper's limited surveillance, confirmed what Jack had feared. This was no longer about one family resisting intimidation, but something much larger. They're forming a coalition, Jack explained during an emergency meeting in the barn. Multiple cartels pooling resources to deal with us. Whatever your mother found must be significant enough to justify this level of coordination. Emma sat with Atlas pressed against her leg, absorbing the gravity of this development. Around the makeshift planning table stood their core allies: Sarah Bennett, Marcus Wilson, Katie Reynolds, Zoe Parker, and Noah Collins, along with several farmers who had joined their resistance network after the failed raid. We intercepted communications between 3 cartel factions, Zoe reported, her classroom teaching demeanor replaced by focused intensity as she displayed intercepted messages on her laptop. They're bringing in professional mercenaries, former military contractors with actual combat experience. Marcus pointed to satellite imagery, showing new equipment being delivered to properties surrounding the Thorn Farm. These aren't just guns, they've got professional-grade surveillance, signal jammers, even what looks like assault vehicles disguised as farm equipment. The implications were clear. Their successful defense had escalated the conflict beyond what a small community resistance could reasonably handle. Several of their allies exchanged concerned glances. The unspoken question hanging in the air: was continued resistance worth the risk? Maybe we should consider their offer, suggested Thompson, whose dairy farm still bore scorch marks from the fire. $3 million would let your family start over somewhere safe, Jack. No shame in protecting your daughter. Emma felt rather than saw her father stiffen beside her. Before he could respond, she stood, her voice steadier than she felt. This stopped being about money the moment we learned they killed my mother, she said. They're not just after our land, they're covering up crimes. If we run, they win. If they win here, they'll keep spreading. More families will lose homes. More people will die. Atlas rose with her, his posture mirroring her determination. The room fell silent, adults regarding the 12-year-old girl with expressions ranging from admiration to concern. Emma's right, Sarah finally said, but we need to be smart about this. We can't match their firepower, but we have something they don't: community knowledge and legitimate standing. We need to use that. Their strategy evolved from purely defensive to a multi-layered approach. While maintaining their security systems, they also began documenting cartel activities, building evidence packages for federal authorities. Katie used her library position to research property records, revealing a pattern of shell companies connected to known cartel finances. Zoe established encrypted communications with trusted contacts in law enforcement beyond Sheriff Cooper's jurisdiction. The cartel's first counter-move came not through violence but legal channels. Notices of environmental violations arrived from state agencies, followed by tax audits and permit challenges. Bureaucratic warfare aimed at tying up the Thorn Farm in litigation while draining their limited resources. They've got people in government offices, Jack concluded grimly after their third summons arrived, trying to make us fight on multiple fronts. Emma's school life deteriorated further. Anonymous complaints led to investigations of her attendance record. Teachers who had once been supportive became distant, afraid of association. Only Miguel Sanchez remained openly loyal, despite increasing pressure from his family. My uncle says they're calling in favors from everywhere, he whispered during a rare private moment. They've got bounties out for information on your farm's defenses. People are watching you all the time. The pressure took its toll on everyone. Jack rarely slept more than a few hours at a stretch, the weight of leadership visible in new lines on his face. Sarah handled logistics with grim efficiency but jumped at unexpected sounds. Marcus worked himself to exhaustion maintaining their equipment and defenses. Emma's nightmares returned with new intensity, featuring her mother's face and rushing water that turned to blood. Through it all, Atlas remained her constant, his warm presence beside her bed each night a talisman against fear. Emma poured her anxiety into his training, developing more sophisticated commands and scenarios. The German Shepherd's already impressive abilities sharpened further. He could now differentiate between various cartel members by scent, recognize specific vehicle sounds from over a mile away, and perform complex scouting patterns without direct supervision. He's not just a dog anymore, Noah observed after watching Atlas methodically check the farm's entire perimeter on silent command. He's a one-animal security system. The cartel's growing frustration manifested in escalating provocations, shots fired near but not at the property, dead animals left on boundary fences, and nighttime broadcasts of screams and threats through directional speakers. Their goal was clear psychological warfare aimed at breaking resolve through fear and sleep deprivation. Then came the blow they'd feared most. Jack Thorne disappeared. He had driven to town for a scheduled meeting with their attorney, a routine trip that should have taken 3 hours round trip. When 5 hours passed with no word, Emma knew something was wrong. Atlas's agitation confirmed her fears. The dog paced and whined, behaviors he showed only when sensing her deepest distress. "Atlas, find Dad," she commanded, offering Jack's flannel shirt for scent. The dog sniffed it thoroughly, then looked up at her with uncharacteristic hesitation, as if communicating that the task exceeded his capabilities. Sheriff Cooper organized a search, but everyone understood the likelihood Jack Thorne had been taken by the cartel as leverage against his daughter and their resistance network. Confirmation came at midnight when Emma's phone received a video call from her father's number. The screen showed Jack bound to a chair, his face bruised but his eyes defiant. Felix Reyes stepped into frame, his customary elegant suit incongruous against the bare concrete background. "Miss Thorne," he said pleasantly, as though they were meeting at a school function. "Your father and I are having a productive conversation about the future of your property. He's been quite stubborn, but I believe we can reach an agreement with your assistance." Emma fought to keep her expression neutral despite the terror gripping her chest. "What do you want?" "The same thing I've always wanted, your land. But now I also want the samples your mother collected, along with all her research notes. You have 24 hours to deliver everything to the old Henderson barn. In exchange, your father returns unharmed." Resist, and Felix gestured casually, and someone off camera struck Jack hard enough to draw blood. The call ended, leaving Emma staring at a blank screen. Atlas pressed anxiously against her side. Sarah, who had witnessed the exchange, immediately called an emergency gathering of their core network. Within an hour, the barn was filled with grim-faced supporters. "We can't give them what they want," Marcus stated bluntly. "Once they have the evidence and the land, they'll have no reason to keep any of you alive." "We can't abandon Jack either," Sarah countered. "There must be an option we haven't considered." All eyes turned to Emma, the tension in the room palpable. At 12 years old, she faced a decision that would overwhelm most adults: her father's life against their cause, immediate safety versus long-term justice. Atlas sat beside her, unusually still, as though understanding the gravity of the moment. "We're going to save my dad," Emma said finally, her voice small but determined. "But we're also going to finish what my mom started. Atlas and I have a plan." The plan was audacious, born of desperation and Emma's unique perspective that adults might have overlooked. While the cartel expected either surrender or a frontal rescue attempt, Emma proposed something different: a multi-layered operation that leveraged their limited resources against the cartel's overconfidence. "They think they understand us now," she explained, indicating the map where they had marked cartel positions. "They're watching for vehicles, monitoring electronic communications, expecting either a direct approach or complete surrender. They're not watching for a dog and a girl." Sarah immediately objected, her protective instincts flaring. "Absolutely not. You are not putting yourself in danger, Emma. Your father would never allow it." "My father taught me everything I need to know," Emma replied with quiet certainty. "And Atlas will protect me. Besides, they won't hurt me until they get what they want, and we're going to make them think they're getting it." The debate raged for hours, arguments for caution warring with the reality that conventional approaches would likely fail. What finally swayed the decision was Atlas himself. When Emma demonstrated the specific sequences she had trained with him, stealth movement patterns, distraction techniques, the ability to identify and mark locations through scent, even the most skeptical had to acknowledge their unique capabilities. "She's not going in alone," Sarah finally conceded. "We create diversions, provide backup, and have multiple extraction plans. If anything seems wrong, we abort immediately." The operation commenced at dusk the following day. While Marcus and several farmers created a diversion at the valley's eastern access road, a convincing accident involving a cattle truck that drew cartel security resources, Emma and Atlas approached the old Henderson barn from the rarely used Western Creek bed. Sarah and Zoa monitored cartel communications from their makeshift command center, while Noah established a medical staging area in the abandoned Forest Ranger Station. Emma carried a backpack containing what appeared to be her mother's research materials, but were actually carefully prepared decoys. The real evidence remained secured in multiple locations, with Katie coordinating its delivery to federal authorities if the operation failed. Emma's heart pounded as she crouched in the shadowed creek bed, the weight of her father's life heavy on her young shoulders. "Stay close," he whispered to Atlas, who moved like a shadow beside her, his focus absolute. They approached the Henderson property from its least monitored boundary, using irrigation culverts and drainage ditches for cover routes that adults would find impassable but were perfectly sized for a slim girl and a dog. Atlas moved ahead at critical junctions, his keen senses detecting patrols before they came into view, allowing Emma to time their movements precisely. The barn loomed against the darkening sky, its weathered structure now surrounded by modern security measures, cameras, motion sensors, armed guards. Emma activated the first phase of their plan, sending Atlas to deploy small devices Marcus had created, simple mechanisms that would create false triggers in the security system, conditioning the guards to ignore certain alerts after multiple false alarms. 2 guards at the main door, 2 more circling the perimeter, came Sarah's voice through the tiny earpiece Emma wore. "Felix just arrived with 3 vehicles. They're moving Jack inside now." Emma swallowed hard, pushing down the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Atlas returned to her side, pressing reassuringly against her leg as they waited for the precisely timed sequence of events they had planned. The sound of emergency sirens in the distance signaled the next phase, Sheriff Cooper creating an official presence that would force the cartel to maintain at least a veneer of legitimate activity. As predicted, the guards' attention shifted momentarily toward this new development, creating the window Emma needed. "Now, Atlas, find Dad," she whispered. The German Shepherd moved with purpose toward a rear entrance they had identified through satellite imagery, a partially collapsed section where the old structure had been inadequately merged with new additions. Small enough for Atlas to navigate and just barely for Emma to squeeze through. Inside, the barn had been transformed into an operations center. Emma froze momentarily at the sight of communications equipment, weapons, and what appeared to be manufacturing machinery in the distance. She forced herself to focus on the immediate goal, locating her father. Atlas led her through the shadows along the building's edge, his nose working constantly, body language signaling when to move and when to hide. They passed alarmingly close to armed men speaking in hushed Spanish, their confidence in their security measures evident in their relaxed postures. Then Emma saw him, her father, still bound to a chair in what had once been a tack room, now serving as an improvised detention cell. A single guard stood outside the door, a rifle held casually across his body. Jack's head hung forward, but the subtle movement of his chest confirmed he was alive. Emma signaled Atlas with a hand gesture they had practiced countless times but never deployed in real conditions. The dog immediately understood, moving silently around the building's periphery until he reached a position opposite the guard. There he created a distraction, a calculated series of sounds that suggested someone moving clumsily in the darkness. The guard reacted predictably, moving toward the sound with his weapon raised. In that brief moment of diverted attention, Emma slipped to the door of the tack room, using a technique Marcus had taught her to manipulate the simple lock. Jack's head snapped up as she entered, his eyes widening in alarm and then horror as he recognized his daughter. "Emma." "No," he whispered hoarsely. "You need to run." "They're going to." "I know what they're going to do," Emma interrupted, working on his restraints. "And we have a plan. Can you walk?" "Barely," he admitted as she freed his hands. "Felix wanted information on your mother's research. They've been persuasive." Emma fought back tears at the sight of her father's injuries. "We have 4 minutes before the next patrol. Atlas is creating a diversion to clear our exit route." As if summoned by his name, Atlas appeared at the door, his mission completed. The dog moved to Jack, briefly nuzzling his hand in greeting before resuming his alert posture. "That's far enough," came Felix's voice from the doorway. Emma turned slowly to find him standing with 2 armed men, his expression a mixture of amusement and admiration. "I must say, Miss Thorne, I underestimated you," Felix continued, gesturing for his men to secure the room. "Using the dog as a tactical element was quite ingenious. Your mother would be proud. She always did appreciate resourcefulness." The casual mention of her mother sent anger coursing through Emma, momentarily overriding her fear. "You knew her before you killed her." Felix's smile faltered slightly. "Catherine and I had a professional relationship, yes. Her death was regrettable but necessary, as I suspect yours will be, once we've secured her research materials. I assume that's what you're carrying?" Emma clutched the backpack tighter, mind racing through contingency plans. Atlas stood rigidly beside her, awaiting command but understanding the need for restraint against armed opponents. "You'll let my father go if I give you this?" she asked, playing for time while hoping Sarah had registered their situation through the open comlink. Of course, Felix lied smoothly. This has always been a simple business transaction, albeit one with escalated negotiation tactics. Jack struggled to his feet, positioning himself slightly in front of Emma, despite his weakened state. "Your business killed my wife and threatens my daughter. There's nothing simple about it." Felix sighed dramatically. "Sentimentality is such a liability in negotiations. Your wife discovered something she shouldn't have, a significant lithium deposit beneath this valley that will be worth billions in the coming battery revolution. Our organization has invested too much in securing mineral rights to allow past indiscretions to surface now." The revelation struck Emma like a physical blow. Not drugs, but minerals. Her mother had discovered environmental evidence of valuable resources threatening not just cartel drug operations, but a far more profitable long-term strategy. Before the situation could deteriorate further, a series of explosions rocked the perimeter of the compound. The secondary diversion Marcus had prepared had been larger and more disruptive than planned. In the momentary confusion, Atlas acted without command, lunging forward to place himself between Emma and the armed men. "Atlas, defend," Emma shouted, abandoning stealth for direct action. Chaos erupted in the confined space of the tack room. Atlas's powerful form became a blur of motion, his training manifesting as precise movements rather than wild aggression. He didn't aim to maim, but to disrupt, knocking one gunman off balance and forcing Felix to retreat several steps. The distraction created the opening Emma and Jack needed, allowing them to lunge toward the door as additional explosions rocked the compound. "This way," Emma shouted, pulling her father toward the escape route they had planned. Atlas broke off his engagement instantly at her command, returning to protective formation as they moved. Outside, the situation had deteriorated into a war zone. Marcus's diversions had escalated beyond the planned scope, with multiple fires breaking out along the perimeter. The cartel forces responded with alarming firepower, automatic weapons fire cutting through the night. Emma glimpsed Sarah's truck speeding toward their extraction point, its headlights briefly illuminating the chaos before swerving to avoid gunfire. "Emma, status." Sarah's voice crackled through the comlink. "We have Dad." Moving to extraction point 2, Emma responded, helping her father navigate through the darkness. His injuries were worse than she had initially assessed. He limped heavily, his breathing labored from what were likely broken ribs. They had covered half the distance to the secondary extraction point when disaster struck. A cartel vehicle rounded the corner of the barn, its headlights catching them in the open. Emma heard the engine rev as it accelerated toward them, giving them only seconds to react. "Get down," Jack shouted, pushing Emma roughly aside just as Atlas darted toward the oncoming threat. The German Shepherd's training would have had him attempt to disable the driver, but in the chaos he miscalculated. The vehicle swerved, striking Atlas with a sickening impact that sent his body tumbling across the gravel. Emma's scream tore through the night as she scrambled toward her fallen companion. "Emma, no." Jack pulled her back as gunfire erupted from the vehicle. In that moment of hesitation, Sarah's truck roared between them and the attackers, providing momentary cover. Noah leaped from the passenger side, medical bag in hand. "Get Atlas," Emma pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Noah worked quickly, assessing the dog's injuries with professional detachment despite the bullet striking the truck's body. Multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding. "He's alive, but barely." They loaded Atlas's limp form into the truck bed, Jack practically lifting Emma in after him as she refused to leave her dog's side. Sarah gunned the engine, the truck fishtailing as they accelerated away from the compound, pursued by 2 cartel vehicles. "Marcus, we need cover," Sarah shouted into her radio. Ahead, the farm equipment Marcus had positioned at strategic points activated, creating a barrier that forced their pursuers to slow. It bought them precious seconds, allowing Sarah to veer onto a logging road that their larger pursuers couldn't navigate as easily. Emma barely registered the escape. Her world narrowed to Atlas's broken body beneath her hands. The dog's breathing came in shallow pants, each one seeming more labored than the last. She pressed her forehead against his, tears falling onto his blood-matted fur. "Stay with me, boy," she whispered. "Please stay with me." When they finally reached the ranger station that served as their fallback position, the full extent of the night's disasters became clear. Not only was Atlas critically injured, but Sarah had taken a bullet to her shoulder during the escape. Jack's injuries from his captivity were severe enough that he could barely stand without assistance. Most devastating of all, they received word that the Thompson family's youngest son had been caught in crossfire when cartel forces expanded their search perimeter, the boy's condition unknown. "They're burning everything," Marcus reported grimly as he arrived, his face blackened with soot. 3 farms hit simultaneously. "They're sending a message to anyone who helped us." Emma watched Noah work frantically to stabilize both Sarah and Atlas, his young face set in grim determination despite being overwhelmed. The ranger station, chosen for its isolation, now felt like a flimsy shelter against the storm raging around them. Through the windows, an orange glow on the horizon marked burning homesteads, lives and livelihoods reduced to ash because they had dared to stand with the thorns. "This is my fault," Emma whispered, her hand resting on Atlas's flank, feeling each labored breath. "I thought we could fight them." Jack, despite his own pain, moved to his daughter's side. "No, Emma. This started long before you. Your mother would have been the first to stand against them, just as you did." The night stretched endlessly, each hour bringing worse news. The cartel forces, enraged by the escape and Emma's continued defiance, had abandoned all pretense of legitimate business. They moved through the valley with military precision, targeting anyone suspected of supporting the resistance. Sheriff Cooper reported at least 15 homes destroyed, families displaced, and emergency services overwhelmed. Noah worked through the night, his medical training stretched to its limits as he treated multiple injuries with dwindling supplies. Atlas's condition stabilized somewhat but remained critical, multiple broken bones, internal injuries, and trauma that would require sophisticated veterinary care they couldn't access. "He needs a real veterinary hospital," Noah admitted quietly to Emma as dawn approached. I've done what I can, but... Emma nodded, understanding the unspoken reality. They were cut off, surrounded by hostile forces with limited resources. The odds of getting Atlas to proper care in time seemed insurmountable. She curled beside her faithful protector on the makeshift bed Noah had arranged, her small hand resting over Atlas's heart, feeling its weakening rhythm. The German shepherd's eyes, usually so alert and intelligent, were clouded with pain, yet he still tried to respond to her presence, his tail offering the faintest movement when she spoke to him. "You saved us," she whispered to him. "You saved Dad. You did everything I asked, exactly like we trained." Her voice broke as she continued, "You're the best dog in the world, Atlas. The very best." Around her, the adults conferred in hushed tones, assessing their increasingly desperate situation. Their communication network had been compromised, with cartel forces jamming signals and intercepting transmissions. Several community members who had supported them were now unaccounted for, possibly captured or worse. The federal authorities Katie had contacted remained frustratingly distant, caught in bureaucratic delays that might render their intervention too late. "We need to move," Marcus insisted. "This location won't stay secure for long." "Move where?" Sarah questioned, her voice weak from blood loss and pain medication. "They've got the main roads blocked, patrols on the back routes. We're surrounded." Jack studied the map spread before them, his tactical mind working despite his injuries. "If we split up, create multiple targets, some of us might get through." "And go where?" Sarah pressed. "Every farm that supported us is burning. We've got wounded who can't travel far." Her gaze drifted to Emma and Atlas. "Some who may not survive a rough journey." The weight of leadership had fallen unexpectedly on Jack's shoulders when their network was most vulnerable. Emma watched her father wrestling with impossible choices, sacrifice some to save others, risk everything on a desperate gamble, or surrender and hope for mercy that would almost certainly not come. As dawn broke fully, Emma made her own decision. Leaving Atlas momentarily under Noah's care, she approached the group of adults. "I know what Mom found," she said, her voice steady despite her red-rimmed eyes. "And I know where she hid the complete evidence." All eyes turned to her, expressions ranging from surprise to concern. "The samples in my backpack were decoys," she continued. "The real ones are hidden in the old well on our property, just like in my dream. Mom's journals have a false bottom. There's a data drive with everything she documented. That's what they really want, and that's what we need to get to the FBI." Her declaration hung in the air, its implications clear. The evidence Catherine Thorne had gathered represented their most powerful weapon against the cartel, proof of not just mineral rights manipulation but environmental crimes, corruption, and ultimately murder. If they could get it into the right hands, it could bring down Felix's entire operation. "It's too dangerous," Jack said immediately. "They'll be watching the farm, expecting us to return." "That's why I need to go alone," Emma replied with a determination that belied her years. "With Atlas injured, they won't expect me to try. They're looking for groups, for vehicles, for adults, not for a girl on her own." The immediate chorus of objections was exactly what she'd expected, but Emma stood firm. As the arguments raged around her, her gaze returned to Atlas, his powerful body now broken because of his loyalty to her. She thought of Sarah bleeding because she'd come to their rescue, or of the Thompson boy injured simply for being connected to their cause, or of her mother, who had died trying to expose the truth. "This has to end," she said finally, cutting through the debate. "And I'm the only one who can end it now." The silence that followed held the weight of shared grief, of hard truths acknowledged. In the distance, smoke continued to rise from burning farms, marking the devastating cost of their resistance. Emma's childhood had effectively ended the moment Felix Reyes had first set foot on their property, but this moment, standing amid the wounded and desperate, taking responsibility for a fight adults had begun, marked her true coming of age. "I won't let Atlas's sacrifice be for nothing," she said, returning to kneel beside her faithful friend, or Mom's, or anyone's. The night passed in tense deliberation, with Emma finally winning a reluctant, conditional agreement to her plan. She would approach the farm at dawn, using routes only a child could navigate, while the adults created diversions to pull cartel surveillance away from critical areas. Dawn found her preparing to leave, kneeling one last time beside Atlas, whose condition had stabilized slightly under Noah's care. "I'll be back for you," she promised, pressing her forehead against his. "Just keep fighting." The German shepherd's tail thumped weakly against the blanket, his eyes, though clouded with pain, focused entirely on her. Noah had explained that Atlas had 3 broken ribs. A shattered leg and internal injuries that required surgical intervention time was not on their side. "Stick to the plan," Jack instructed, his face haggard with worry and pain. "Observation only. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you abort and return immediately." The father in him warred visibly with the strategist, knowing his daughter represented their best chance but terrified of the risks. Emma slipped away as the first light touched the eastern hills, moving through forest paths she had known since childhood. She wore clothes borrowed from a local child, nondescript, unremarkable, and carried nothing that might identify her. Without Atlas at her side, she felt horribly vulnerable, every snapping twig or rustling leaf triggering a surge of fear. She reached the boundary of their property as the valley awakened fully to daylight, providing her first unobstructed view of what the night's violence had wrought. The Thompson farm still smoldered in the distance. Cartel vehicles patrolled the main roads, their movements suggesting organized search patterns rather than random intimidation. Most shocking was the Thorne farmhouse itself, partially burned but still standing, surrounded by makeshift barricades and armed men. Emma circled cautiously toward the old orchard, where the capped well that featured in her dreams was located. The area appeared unguarded, considered insignificant compared to the house and barn. Using irrigation ditches and the natural contours of the land, she managed to reach the well without detection, her heart hammering so loudly she feared it might give her away. The well's cap had not been disturbed, a heavy concrete seal her father had installed years ago as a safety measure. Emma had brought no tools, knowing any equipment might be spotted during her approach. Instead, she relied on knowledge only a child raised on the farm would possess. The cap had been improperly set, leaving a small gap on the northern edge. Her mother had discovered this flaw and evidently utilized it. Emma worked her fingers into the narrow space, leveraging her slight weight against the concrete. It shifted grudgingly, just enough to expose a section of the well's interior. There, affixed to the inner wall in a waterproof container exactly where her dream had indicated, she found what she sought: sealed sample vials and a waterproof case containing what appeared to be a small hard drive. As she secured these items in her clothing, a voice froze her in place. "I had wondered if Catherine might have used this location," Sheriff Cooper said quietly from behind her. "It's exactly the kind of clever hiding spot she would have chosen." Emma whirled to find the sheriff standing alone, his badge catching the morning light, his service weapon holstered but visible. "How did you find me?" she demanded, backing away instinctively. "I've been watching your movements since you left the ranger station," he replied calmly. "Did you really think we wouldn't have the area under surveillance?" "We?" Emma felt cold dread spreading through her chest. "You're working with them. With Felix." To her surprise, Cooper shook his head. "No, Emma, I'm working against them, just not as Sheriff Cooper." He reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew a different badge, federal credentials that identified him as Special Agent Cooper, Environmental Crimes Division, FBI. "I don't understand," Emma whispered, still poised to flee. "Your mother was my informant," Cooper explained, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. "Catherine approached federal authorities 3 years ago with evidence of environmental crimes connected to cartel operations. She was gathering the final samples that would have completed our case when she was killed." The revelation struck Emma like a physical blow. "You knew?" All this time you knew what happened to my mom? I suspected, but couldn't prove it, Cooper replied, genuine regret in his voice. After her death, the investigation stalled. Without her evidence and testimony, we couldn't move forward. I was assigned to remain in place undercover to rebuild the case. Then why didn't you help us? Emma demanded, anger rising through her confusion. People have died, homes destroyed. Atlas is, her voice broke on her dog's name. I have been helping in ways you couldn't see, Cooper insisted. Why do you think Felix's men never found your father's military footlocker? Who do you think has been redirecting cartel surveillance away from your network's movements? I've been walking a tightrope. Emma, maintaining cover while trying to protect your family without exposing a 3-year federal operation. Emma processed this, her young mind reassessing months of events through this new lens. Certain inconsistencies suddenly made sense: the sheriff's convenient absences during critical moments, his detailed knowledge of cartel movements, his sometimes contradictory advice that had, in retrospect, subtly guided their actions. There's more, Cooper continued. Your father knows who I am. We served together. What? Emma's world tilted further on its axis. Jack Thorne wasn't just any military K-9 handler. He was special operations, assigned to classified missions, including several involving cartel interdiction. When he met your mother during an environmental assessment of a former military training ground, neither realized their separate investigations were targeting the same criminal organization. But Emma struggled to reconcile this new information with the quiet, reserved father she had known all her life. Does he know you're here now? No, Cooper admitted. My cover is blown. Felix has discovered my real identity. That's why I had to find you first. Everything's accelerating. A distant explosion punctuated his statement, both of them turning toward the sound. A secondary diversion Sarah and Marcus had planned to draw attention from Emma's mission. We need to move, Cooper urged. Felix isn't just after your mother's evidence anymore. He's desperate, wounded, and determined to eliminate all witnesses before pulling out completely. Pulling out? Your resistance did more damage than you realize. The cartel coalition is fracturing. Some factions want to abandon the operation as too costly. Others are insisting on complete elimination of all opposition as a matter of principle. Felix is losing control, making him more dangerous. Together they moved away from the well, Cooper leading her toward a concealed vehicle he had positioned nearby. As they traveled, he filled in more gaps in Emma's understanding: how her mother had discovered unusual chemical signatures in groundwater samples that indicated not just drug processing but pilot extraction operations for lithium, a metal growing increasingly valuable for battery production. The entire valley sits on one of the largest untapped lithium deposits in North America, Cooper explained. Your mother connected the mineral rights purchases to cartel shell companies, exposing not just current crimes but a decade-long strategy that represented billions in potential profit. That's why Felix knew my mother, Emma realized. They weren't just adversaries. He was specifically assigned to counter her investigation. Yes, Felix Race's actual name is Philip Reynolds. Before working for the cartel, he was a corporate security consultant for mining companies. He recognized your mother from environmental impact hearings where they had been on opposing sides. The revelation of Felix's true identity landed like another shock. Reynolds? Like Katie Reynolds from the library? Cooper nodded grimly. His sister. That's how they've been gathering intelligence on your community network. Katie has been their inside source all along. Emma's mind reeled with betrayal. Katie had been one of her mother's closest friends, had helped Emma find books on dog training after Catherine's death, had been entrusted with delivering evidence packages to federal authorities if their operation failed. The packages we sent through her never reached us, Cooper confirmed. She's been playing both sides, feeding the cartel information while appearing to support your resistance. As they approached the rendezvous point where Jack and the others waited, Emma struggled to process these cascading revelations. Her parents' lives had been far more complex than she had ever imagined, their quiet farm existence concealing deeper purposes. The community she thought she knew contained both unexpected allies and devastating betrayals. Cooper parked at a distance from the cabin, approaching cautiously to avoid being mistaken for a threat. The reunion was tense. Jack's shock at seeing his former comrade quickly giving way to understanding as Cooper explained his undercover role. Sarah, despite her injuries, immediately recognized the strategic advantage this development represented. "If you're federal, where's your backup?" Marcus demanded, still suspicious. "On standby at the state line," Cooper replied. "But they're waiting for authorization based on evidence Emma has just recovered." He nodded toward the samples and drive Emma had retrieved. "With this, we can move from investigation to intervention." Noah interrupted with urgent news about Atlas. "His breathing's getting worse. The internal bleeding isn't stopping with the limited supplies we have." Emma rushed to her dog's side, finding him visibly weaker, his once bright eyes dulled with pain. She looked up at Cooper pleadingly. "He needs a veterinary hospital." "There's a federal tactical veterinarian with the standby team," Cooper said, "specialized in treating military working dogs with combat injuries. If we can get Atlas to them." Hope flickered through Emma's despair. "Then let's go now." "It's not that simple," Cooper cautioned. "Felix Phillip has roadblocks on every route out of the valley. And with Katie's betrayal, we have to assume they know about this location too. We may have hours, maybe less." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Emma. "The evidence transfer protocols," she said suddenly. "Mom's journals mentioned emergency extraction procedures using the old mining tunnels that run under the eastern ridge. They connect to access roads outside the valley." Jack nodded slowly, recognition dawning. "Catherine insisted on mapping those tunnels when we first moved here. I thought she was being thorough about environmental assessment. She was creating escape routes." "Those tunnels aren't on any recent maps," Cooper confirmed. "Felix wouldn't know about them unless Katie does." "She doesn't," Emma said confidently. "Mom only showed them to me after Katie missed one of their research trips. She said some things needed to stay just between us thorns." A new plan formed rapidly. Cooper would lead a small team including Emma and Atlas through the mining tunnels to reach the federal staging area, while Jack and the others created a final diversion to convince Felix they were attempting to break through the roadblocks. Once Emma delivered the evidence and Atlas received treatment, the federal response would finally move against the Cartels' operation. As they prepared to separate again, Jack drew Emma aside. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have her courage and her clarity." "I have your strength too," Emma replied, hugging him fiercely. "And we'll need all of it to finish this." The revelations had transformed their understanding, but not their determination. With truth finally exposed, new allies revealed, and betrayals acknowledged, they prepared for the final confrontation not as naive resistors, but as informed participants in a struggle larger than they had ever imagined. The mining tunnels proved more challenging than Emma had anticipated. Narrow passages barely wide enough for adults required Cooper to carry Atlas's stretcher at awkward angles, the dog's labored breathing echoing in the confined space. Decades of disuse had left sections partially collapsed, forcing detours through subsidiary tunnels that Catherine Thorne had meticulously mapped in her journals. Emma led the way, worry, her small flashlight illuminating mineral-streaked walls that testified to the valley's hidden wealth, the very treasure that had ultimately cost her mother's life. "Your mom was extraordinary," Cooper said during a brief rest. "She mapped these tunnels single-handedly, creating evacuation routes while disguising her work as environmental research." Emma nodded, gently stroking Atlas's head as Noah checked his vital signs. "She always said knowledge was the best preparation for whatever might come. I just never understood what she was preparing for." The diversion orchestrated by Jack and the others commenced on schedule, the distant sounds of engines and occasional gunfire filtering even through the solid rock surrounding them. According to their plan, Marcus would lead a high-profile attempted breakthrough at the North Valley checkpoint, drawing cartel forces away from the eastern ridge where the mining tunnels emerged. They reached the tunnel exit as dusk approached. Cooper, using specialized equipment to verify the area was clear before signaling the federal response team waiting beyond the ridge. Within minutes, a tactical vehicle arrived with the promised veterinary specialist, who immediately began treating Atlas while Cooper transmitted the critical evidence Emma had recovered to Justice Department officials standing by. "How bad is it?" Emma asked the veterinarian, unwilling to leave Atlas's side despite Cooper's urging to move to a more secure location. "Critical but stabilizing," the woman replied, her practiced hands working swiftly to establish IV lines and administer emergency treatments. "But German Shepherds are fighters, and this one clearly has something worth fighting for." She nodded toward Emma with understanding in her eyes. "We need to move him to our mobile surgical unit immediately." Atlas was loaded into a specially equipped vehicle, Emma maintaining contact with him throughout the transfer. As they prepared to depart for the staging area, Cooper received urgent communication that transformed their careful extraction into an immediate crisis response. "Felix has Jack," he reported grimly. "The diversion went wrong. Someone tipped them off about the timing. They're holding him at your farmhouse, demanding the evidence in exchange for his life." Emma's world narrowed to a single, terrible choice: her father's life against justice for her mother and all the others who had suffered. Atlas whined softly from his stretcher, as if sensing her distress despite his own grave condition. "How long does Felix have before your teams move in?" she asked Cooper. 3 hours. We need time to position tactical units around the valley perimeter." Emma made her decision with the clarity that had become her hallmark throughout the ordeal. "Then we have 3 hours to save my dad and still bring Felix to justice." Cooper initially objected, but Emma's plan was sound, built on her intimate knowledge of the farm and insights into Felix's psychology that the federal agents lacked. While Cooper coordinated with tactical teams, Emma worked with Noah and the veterinarian to stabilize Atlas for transport. Despite his injuries, the dog had shown remarkable responsiveness when Emma spoke, as though drawing strength from her presence. "I need him with me," Emma insisted when the veterinarian recommended leaving Atlas in the surgical unit. "Not for fighting, just for Felix to see." The final confrontation took shape with precision timing. As dusk deepened into night, Cooper's team established surveillance on the Thorne farmhouse, confirming Jack's presence and documenting Felix's dwindling forces. Many had already abandoned the operation as federal pressure mounted throughout the region. Emma approached her home openly, walking up the main drive with Cooper disguised as a local doctor bringing Atlas on a stretcher behind her. Her father's face, visible through the front window, showed both fear and fierce pride as she stopped at the porch steps. "I've brought what you wanted," Emma called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The evidence in exchange for my father." Felix emerged from the doorway, his elegant appearance now disheveled, the corporate security consultant visible beneath the cartel facade. Jack stood beside him, restraints binding his wrists, his face bruised but his eyes alert. "Emma." "No," Jack began, but Felix silenced him with a sharp gesture. "The great Catherine Thorne's daughter," Felix said, studying Emma with a mixture of admiration and hatred. "As persistent as your mother, and ultimately as foolish. Where are the samples in the drive?" "First let my father go," Emma replied. "And I want to know why." "Why my mother? You knew her before all this." Something flickered across Felix's face, an emotion Emma couldn't immediately identify. Regret? Shame? It vanished quickly beneath calculated control. "Professional necessity," he said flatly. "Catherine and I crossed paths years before during environmental impact hearings for mining operations. She recognized me when our operations here became problematic." You engineered the flood that killed her, Emma stated, not a question but a confirmation. Felix nodded slightly. Water is unpredictable. The storm provided opportunity and plausible deniability. She trusted you, Emma pressed, buying time as she noted Cooper's team taking positions around the property perimeter. Like Katie Reynolds trusted you, your own sister, who you manipulated into betraying her friends. Katie understood practical realities, Felix replied. Family loyalty. Concepts your mother rejected when she chose environmental ideology over protecting her own child's future. The accusation struck Emma like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Felix smiled thinly. Catherine never told you. When we first met, years before you were born, she and I were on the same side. Both working for resource development companies, both believing in progress. We were close, until her principles became inconvenient. The implication hung in the air between them. Jack's expression confirmed what Felix had deliberately left unspoken, a connection between Emma's mother and this man that went deeper than professional rivalry. You're lying, Emma said, though uncertainty colored her voice. Ask your father, Felix suggested with cruel satisfaction. Ask him why Catherine was so determined to destroy me specifically, but why this battle became personal long before you were born. Emma refused the bait, focusing instead on their immediate situation. The evidence is here, she said, producing the waterproof case containing the hard drive. Let my father go, and it's yours. Felix gestured, and 2 remaining cartel members moved forward to collect the case, maintaining weapons trained on Jack. As they reached Emma, Atlas, who had appeared nearly unconscious on his stretcher, suddenly raised his head and fixed Felix with an unwavering stare. Your dog, Felix remarked, unexpected emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. I had one like him as a boy, before circumstances forced certain choices. He seemed transfixed by Atlas's obvious loyalty, despite grievous injuries sustained protecting his family. In that moment of distraction, Cooper gave the signal. Federal agents materialized from concealed positions, their coordinated movements so precise that Felix's men were disarmed before they could react. Jack seized the opportunity to break free from his now distracted guard, moving swiftly to Emma's side. Federal agents, weapons down, Cooper announced, dropping his disguise and displaying his credentials. Felix, recognizing the completeness of his defeat, made no move toward the weapon at his side. Instead, he maintained eye contact with Emma, something like respect mingling with resignation in his expression. You're more like her than you know, he said quietly. Catherine would have done exactly this, sacrificed everything for her principles, but found a way to save what she loved most. I never understood that paradox until now. As agents secured him, Felix asked unexpectedly, the dog, will he survive? Yes, Emma answered, though the veterinarian had made no such guarantee. Atlas is stronger than anyone knows. The following days brought healing and reconstruction to Ironwood Valley. Federal authorities moved swiftly against cartel operations throughout the region, using Catherine Thorne's evidence to dismantle not just the immediate threat but the entire illegal mineral acquisition scheme. Property was returned to displaced families and a special task force established to remediate environmental damage from cartel operations. Atlas underwent multiple surgeries at a specialized veterinary hospital, his recovery becoming something of a local legend. Children from throughout the valley brought handmade get well cards, many featuring crayon drawings of a heroic German shepherd protecting a farm. Emma visited daily, reading these cards aloud and telling Atlas stories of the community's rebuilding efforts. A memorial service for Sarah Bennett, who had succumbed to her injuries despite Noah's best efforts, united the valley in collective mourning and resolve. The community that had once been divided by fear found new strength in shared resilience, with the Thorne Farm becoming a natural gathering place for coordination of reconstruction efforts. 1 month after the confrontation, Emma sat with her father on their porch, watching Atlas take his first tentative steps since the surgeries. The dog's movements were careful but determined, his rehabilitation expected to continue for months. Like the valley itself, Atlas carried scars that would never fully vanish but had found a way forward nonetheless. "Mom would be proud of all of us," Emma said, leaning against her father's shoulder. Jack nodded, his arm around his daughter. "She always said you had her mind, but a heart entirely your own." She was right. On the horizon, the sun set over Ironwood Valley, illuminating fields that would soon be replanted, homes being rebuilt, and a community forever changed but undefeated. Atlas made his way slowly up the porch steps to lie at Emma's feet, his loyalty undiminished by all he had endured. Some wounds would never completely heal: the loss of Sarah, the trauma of violence, the complicated truth about Catherine's past with Felix. But as darkness fell and stars appeared above the Montana mountains, Emma Thorne understood that healing wasn't about erasing scars, but learning to carry them with strength and grace. Atlas rested his head on her foot, his warm presence a reminder that love persisted through the darkest trials. In this moment of quiet triumph that seemed like truth enough to build a future upon. In the quiet corners of life, it's often our most innocent companions who teach us the most profound lessons. Emma and Atlas remind us that courage isn't measured by physical strength, but by the capacity of our hearts to love and protect what matters most. Like many of you who've weathered life's storms, they face seemingly insurmountable odds with nothing but determination and unwavering loyalty. Their story speaks to what we all know to be true, that the bond between humans and our four-legged companions transcends words, becoming something miraculous in times of need. It reminds us that our greatest legacy isn't in possessions or achievements, but in the values we pass to the next generation. The courage to stand firm when it would be easier to retreat, the wisdom to recognize what's worth fighting for, and the compassion that ultimately distinguishes right from wrong. In a world that often seems to have forgotten the meaning of loyalty and sacrifice, Emma and Atlas stand as testament to what we've always known, that love, in its purest form, remains the most powerful force on earth. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.